Hi there, this is Cantor Mike Weiss with an overview of the system we use to chant Torah, Haftarah, and the Megillot in the synagogue. What we're going to do in this video is go over some of the most basic foundational concepts of the Cantillation system so that literally anyone with basic knowledge of Hebrew reading can learn to chant from the Torah. And when I say basic knowledge, I mean that you need to know the sounds of all the letters and vowels of the Hebrew alphabet. So this is going to be basic stuff. What it's not going to be, though, is a review of those Hebrew letters or vowels. Torah chanting can get very complicated very quickly if you don't know all those sounds. So make sure you know them before you jump into this. What this video is also not going to be is an overview of all the trope sounds themselves. The purpose of this video is to make sure you understand why we bother to chant trope at all, and to explain to you how the trope enables you to chant words of any length that you might encounter in your studies. So, without further ado, let's take a look at an actual piece of Torah. So, here we have a piece of Torah, up close and personal. This is a piece of an actual Torah scroll, and you may even already know how to chant this particular piece of text, which you may recognize as the Shema and Ve'ahavta. If you know how to chant it, you probably think it goes something like this. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. But when we chant it from the Torah, it actually sounds more like this. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. So having heard that, you may be wondering how I knew to chant it that way. You may also be wondering how you would even know how to pronounce the words, since there are no vowels. And you would also not know where sentences started and ended because there's no punctuation either. The answer is that if all you had to go on was this text, you wouldn't know the answers to any of those questions. Now, we take a little bit closer look with the magnifier. We'll see that this is handwritten. You can tell that some of the letters have little crowns on them, little keters, and not all of them, some of them. And you also can see that if you look, it's not always immediately apparent where one word starts and another word ends. Oh, look at that. My startup disk is almost full. Where one starts and another ends. So this is not the easiest text to figure out. And if we really want to know how to read this properly, we're going to need to take a look at it from a completely different perspective. Now this is a little bit more like what we're used to seeing. First of all, it's printed neatly, so it's a lot easier to read. We've got all the vowels, so we know how to pronounce the words. We've got verse numbers, so we know where verses start and end. We even have these things that look like periods. It's definitely a lot more familiar. But there's something else. Each word has at least one or sometimes two little symbols below or above it that you may not have seen before. Those symbols are called tropes or cantillation marks. In Hebrew, we call them ta'amei hamikra, but for the purposes of this video, we'll just call them tropes. So let's take a closer look, just so you know for sure what I'm talking about. Let's use the magnifier, get the magnifier in here. Now what you can see from this image is that every single word has one of these trope symbols underneath or above it. On the first line, they happen all to be underneath. The first word on the right, on the second line, even has two tropes, one above it and one below it. And if you'll notice, the one above right here where my cursor is, looks exactly the same as this vowel here that we're already familiar with. So we don't want to confuse the trope with the vowel just because they look the same. What we'll find later is that we'll always be able to identify the trope based on where it is. But for now, it's just important to know that sometimes you will see things like that. But every single one of these words has a trope above or below it. And I've circled them all in red so you can see them here. There are altogether 28 symbols, and it represents like a little musical alphabet. Each one of the symbols represents a musical phrase. And as I said, taken together, they're a musical alphabet. And we're not going to hear all of them now, since this is just meant to be an introduction. But for the purposes of this video, we're going to take a closer look at just one of these symbols and kind of take it for a test drive to see what we can do with it. Underneath the word Shema, you can see this little curved symbol facing toward the right, kind of like a backwards comma. Now, every time we see that symbol, we're going to chant on that syllable where the sound appears, da da da. So on this word, for instance, it would be ma. Okay? So we're only looking at that syllable for now. We'll get to entire words later. Okay? Now, I've circled all the other words in here, or all the other places where that particular trope appears. And every time we see that symbol, we're going to chant the same little melody. So we've got ma over here. Let me get the magnifier back. Hey. Remember, we're not doing the entire word right now. We're just on the syllable where this thing appears. Here's cha. Here's ta. Here's another cha again. Cha. Fot. Te. Okay, so that's most of them. Not every one of them. We didn't do all of them. We did most of them. But that's the way it'll be every single time you see that trope. You'll see the trope under a particular syllable, and you will then chant that syllable with that little melody. Da da da. Okay? Now, one of the primary functions of trope is to let us know which syllable of a word is supposed to be emphasized. Now, that might not seem like a big deal, but we already know lots of words that would change their meaning if we emphasized the wrong syllable. For instance, we could pronounce this word either one of two ways. We could pronounce it invalid or invalid, depending on which syllable I choose to emphasize. I might be talking about a person who's physically incapacitated if I say invalid, or something that's no longer valid, like a coupon that's expired, if I say invalid. So it's critical that we know in English which syllable to emphasize in order to make sure that we get the meaning right. In Hebrew, there are many, many more words where this issue will come into play. So the trope tells us which syllable to emphasize. So now we know what sound we have to make whenever we see that trope, and we know why we have to make that sound. But how does that work with actual words? We happen to have a few examples here that we can work with. So let's start with the Shema. Okay, here we have the word Shema. We know that when we see the symbol, we say da da da, ma. Okay, now that gets us halfway there. Because it only shows us how to chant one syllable. The question is, what do we do with that other syllable? If you know anything about music, then you already know what a pickup is. Each trope has a pickup, which we may or may not need, depending on the length of the word and where the emphasis is. If the term pickup doesn't mean anything to you, then just think of each trope as being composed of two parts. A get ready part and a go part. Of course, we want to keep in mind that we're reading all this from right to left, which is why I have the little arrow guy in there. So before we get into multisyllabic words, which is obviously most words, including a word like Shema, let's make sure we understand how to deal with words of one syllable. Once you understand how to apply a trope properly to words of a single syllable, you'll have the basis for applying them to words of any length. So let's start with the word et on the second line, second word in from the right. Let's take a closer look at it in isolation from the rest of the text. So in a one-syllable word like et, all we have to do is chant the notes we already know while saying the word. We know the notes, da-da-da, and we know the word et. Together, it sounds like et. Now I put the little running guy under it so that you remember that this is the go part of the trope. All right? Let's try another example. This is the word al. Again, all we have to do is put the sounds together with the word. We have our trope, da-da-da, and we have our word, al. And together it sounds like this. Al. Okay, let's try one more example before we move on. Before I chant this one for you, you might want to pause the video and try it yourself. If you got it right, it should have sounded something like this. Bach. The trope is da-da-da, or da-da-da. Sorry saying it. The word is Bach, and together they sound like Bach. Now, one thing I will tell you is that if you do not absolutely know all the sounds of all the letters and vowels in the Hebrew alphabet, this will get a lot more difficult really fast. So if you think you need a review of your Hebrew letter and vowel sounds, then stop watching this and get going on your Hebrew. There are plenty of free apps and videos out there, so get those sounds down and then come back and try this. You'll get a lot more out of this once you've got those sounds out of the way. And be clear that it's the sounds you need to know, not the names of the letters and vowels. Don't get caught up learning the names. You can always come back and learn them later. Now, let's take a look at a word that's a little bit more complicated. This is the word Shema. Not a hard word to pronounce, and it's got our same trope symbol underneath it, which, by the way, is called tipcha. But this time, there's a second syllable. Instead of just the go part, which you already know how to chant, now there's this other syllable to deal with. We're going to call this the get ready part. And I put the little guy there who's on his marks ready to go. Now for you musicians out there, we'll need a pickup. And it sounds like this. Shema, 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 Shema. Remember that we're always chanting actual words that mean something. So really push yourself to make sure it sounds like a word and not a bunch of disconnected syllables. So you're not saying Shema or Shema. You're saying Shema. If it takes you time on some of the more complicated words to get to that point, you have to say it out loud a few times. Be sure to take whatever time you need to make sure the word actually sounds like a word and not just like a bunch of syllables. Now, let's take another look at another word from the same passage that we've been working on. This is another two-syllable word, hayom, with the emphasis on yom. We know how yom goes. It goes like this. Yom. And just like with Shema, we add our pickup or get ready note, and it sounds like this. Hayom, hayom, hayom. Okay? Let's look at one more word that follows the same pattern. This is the word leot. You might want to pause the video and try this one for yourself before hearing the answer, which, if you got it right, would have sounded something like this. Leot, leot, leot. Okay, so this is great if all you have is words of one or two syllables. But what do you do when the words get longer? This is the word Elohe. Not a long word, but 3 syllables long. You'll notice that the trope is still there under the last syllable. Hey! No different than what we've experienced before. But this time, instead of one get ready note, or pickup note, we've got 2. We're not going to do anything fancy. We're just going to repeat that get ready note. Elo. And then we put it together with the hey. Elohe, Elohe, Elohe. So however many pickup notes or however many syllables you have before the trope, you're just going to lengthen or repeat that get ready note until you get where you want to go. Now let's look at an even longer word and see if you can do this one on your own first. How'd you do? Again, we've got our go syllable that sounds like this. Fot. And now we've got 3 pickups or 3 syllables to get ready. So all we're going to do is repeat that same pickup 3 times, like this. Le, to, ta. Right? Le, to, ta, fot. Is this making sense? I hope so. Because now I'm going to ask you to pause the video again before I do this one. And I want to encourage you, if you need to make sure you can pronounce the word easily without chanting it before you try to chant it. This whole thing goes much, much more easily if you already can pronounce the word correctly. So why don't you pause now, and we'll come back in a moment. First, you should have pronounced the word as v'dibarta. Our go syllable is ta. The temptation on a word like this is to put the emphasis on v'dibarta, which is what a lot of people say, and you may hear that in synagogue actually quite a bit. But the word is actually pronounced v'dibarta. Okay, so we know that ta is the same as it's always been. Ta. And our get ready syllables are v'dibar. V'dibar. Okay? If you chant it together, we got v'dibarta. V'dibarta. Okay? Now we're going to look at one more example before we make things even a little bit more complicated. Note that there are 4 get ready syllables and 1 go syllable at the end, as with all the other words. The only difference here is that you have this line. You have this line here that I'm pointing to that looks like a hyphen, and it's called a makaf. When you have a makaf, all it does is tell you to treat those 2 words like 1 word. So that's what we're going to do. Pause now and give it a try. Remember to make sure that you can pronounce this word before you try to chant it. Now this word is a little more complicated, so if you didn't pronounce it exactly like I do, don't worry about it yet. Eventually in other lessons we'll go over why I am pronouncing it the way I am. This word is pronounced uvchol nafshecha. Uvchol nafshecha. Not uvechol nafshecha, but uvchol nafshecha. Okay, we've got our go syllable, like we always have, the cha at the end, and it sounds like this. Cha. And we've got 4 get ready syllables. So we're going to repeat that get ready note 4 times. Uvchol nafshecha. Uvchol nafshecha. Uvchol nafshecha. You got it? It doesn't matter how many syllables come before that go syllable. You're just going to repeat that get ready note as many times as you need to. Okay, now, all the examples we've looked at so far have the go syllable at the end of the word. We're looking back here at our word Elohei. Elohei. Now that would be great if every Hebrew word had its emphasis on the final syllable, but it doesn't. There are a lot of rules in Hebrew, and almost all of them have exceptions. But this is a rule that has no exceptions. In Hebrew, every word is accented or emphasized on either the final syllable or the next to last syllable. No exceptions. So here on this word Elohei, the accent is on the last syllable. We call this type of accent milra, when the final syllable of the word is accented. But what if we add a syllable onto this word and change it from Elohei to Eloheinu? Here's what that looks like. We've gone from Elohei to Eloheinu. The go syllable is still hey, but now it's not the final syllable anymore. The get ready syllable is the same. We have this nu on the end. When that happens, all we do is extend the go notes to include the last syllable. In this case, we have da-di-da, 3 notes for our go syllable. We would just chant that last syllable with the 3rd note. Heinu, Heinu, Heinu. If we put together with our get ready notes, we have Eloheinu, 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 Eloheinu. Right? So we're just taking our go notes and we're stretching them over the 2 syllables now that have to be covered. This is called, this type of accent, where the accent is on the next to last syllable, rather, of the word, is called mil-el. And you see I've got our little running guy, stretched him out a little bit. It looks like he gained a little weight here. Okay? We're going to take one look at one more example before we wrap up this video. Now pause the video and try this one yourself again. This word is pronounced be-techa. 1 get-ready syllable, and the go syllable is te, and the word ends with the syllable cha. It's be-techa, 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 be-techa. Okay? So that's how that's done. Now when we go back to our original text, we now know how to chant every one of the words that have a tipcha underneath them. Let's go through each one of them, because we just did most of them. This one is Shema Eloheinu et uvchol nafshecha hayom v'dibarta. We didn't do this one, but this one is uvshoch becha leot letotafot betecha. Okay? So now when we go back to our original text, we didn't know anything about this text before, but now we're a little bit closer to figuring out how to chant the whole thing. In subsequent videos, we're going to take a closer look at the entire trope system and break it down into nice, easy to digest chunks that I hope will make the process of learning it easier for you. Normally, most people learn the whole trope system and then learn how to apply it to words. But since the whole point of the trope is to be able to use it to chant words, I thought it would be better to start chanting words first and then learn the rest of the tropes later. So we'll see you next time. If you have any questions, feel free to email me and I'll be happy to help. Let me put my email address on screen and you can write to me whenever you need. Thanks for watching. Happy laning!